Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're heading back in time, way back, to ancient Egypt, or should I say, Kemet, as it was originally known.
Kemet. I like how that sounds. Really gets to the heart of it.
Right, and you know our listeners, they're all about getting to the heart of the matter, especially with a topic as loaded as this one, because we're going to be unpacking how Europeans, taking artifacts, taking knowledge from Kemet, has really affected how African Americans see their own history, their own identity.
And it's a conversation that's so often overlooked. People hear ancient Egypt and they think pyramids, pharaohs, maybe Indiana Jones. They don't often make that immediate connection to Africa, to its legacy.
It's true. So let's break that down. For those who might not know, can you give us that foundational understanding of Kemet's African roots?
Absolutely.
Mm.
We have to dispel this myth that ancient Egypt was somehow separate from Africa, that it just magically appeared
Yeah.
as this advanced civilization. Kemet was deeply, inherently African. It's
Yeah.
not just about geographic location either, though that's important. It's about the people, the culture, the entire tapestry of its development.
So we're talking about a civilization that wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And for how long?
For millennia.
Yeah.
And when I say thriving, I mean they weren't just getting by, they were innovating. We're talking sophisticated writing systems, incredible architecture, obviously, but also significant advancements in math, medicine, even astronomy. This is a society at the forefront of knowledge.
See, this is what I love about these deep dives. It's easy to get caught up in the grandeur of the pyramids, right? Which, don't get me wrong, are absolutely awe-inspiring. But they were light years ahead in so many other areas. But if this knowledge was so advanced, what happened? Where did the disconnect happen?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Over centuries, so much of Kemet's brilliance was, well, taken, looted, really, by Europeans. And with that removal of physical objects, of cultural understanding, you start to see a disconnect form, particularly for people of African descent.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. How can you fully understand your heritage when those crucial parts are missing?
Exactly. Imagine trying to tell a story with half the pages ripped out. You might get the gist, but the depth, the nuances are lost.
So how do we even begin to recover those lost pages, those missing pieces? Where do we even start?
We have to start by acknowledging what was lost, how it was lost, and the impact that loss has had. And then we can start piecing together those fragments, using every available resource, every artifact, every story passed down to recreate a fuller picture of the past.
It feels almost like detective work, doesn't it? Trying to piece together this fragmented history.
In a way, it is. And just like any good detective, we need to follow the evidence where it leads. And sometimes that means challenging long-held assumptions.
You're right, we can't shy away from the uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. We have to be willing to look at the past with a critical eye, to question the narratives that have been presented to us, and to search for those missing voices.
And on that note, let's dive into one of the biggest pieces of this puzzle, the theft itself. How did Europeans justify this taking of artifacts of knowledge? Was it all just brute force, or was there something more insidious at play?
That's where things get really interesting and complicated, because it was never just about the objects themselves. It was about control, about shaping the narrative, about asserting dominance. And to do that, they used a whole arsenal of tactics.
This is what I find so fascinating. It wasn't just about stealing treasure. It was about stealing history, about stealing a legacy. And it's something that still has repercussions today.
Absolutely. This isn't ancient history. This is a story that continues to unfold. The removal of those artifacts, the suppression of knowledge, it created a void. And into that void rushed a whole set of narratives, often crafted by those who benefited most from the silence. Narratives that painted Africa as a continent devoid of history, devoid of progress. And those narratives, unfortunately, have had a long shelf life.
And that's precisely why we're here, to challenge those narratives, to bring those silenced voices to the forefront, and to understand how this theft has impacted the way generations have seen themselves, their place in the world.
Because this isn't just about objects locked away in museums. This is about a legacy that was disrupted, a connection that was severed. And it's a connection that many are now striving to reclaim.
And it's a powerful movement, this reclaiming of history, of identity. But we'd be remiss if we didn't also address some of the more, shall we say, creative interpretations that tend to crop up around ancient Egypt.
Oh, you mean like the whole Atlantis connection?
You read my mind. I knew that was coming. It's like this irresistible siren song. People hear lost civilization, advanced technology, and suddenly Egypt's not mysterious enough on its own. We have to weave in sunken continents and mythical beings.
It's understandable in a way. Humans have always been drawn to a good mystery. But the danger lies in letting speculation overshadow reality. Atlantis, as captivating a tale as it is, remains just that, a tale. There's no concrete archaeological evidence to support its existence as anything more than a story.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. You might get a few stories up, but eventually...
It crumbles. And we have to be careful not to let these fantastical narratives undermine the very real, very documented achievements of civilizations like Kemet. Because those achievements, they stand on their own merit, without needing embellishment from myths and legends.
Exactly. We have this rich, complex history right in front of us. We don't need to look to fictional lost continents when we have a real lost legacy to uncover.
And it's a legacy that continues to impact us today. Because the echoes of that theft, that disruption, they're still felt. Whether it's the lack of representation in textbooks, the debates over repatriation of artifacts, or even just the way we perceive African history as a whole. These are all threads in a tapestry that stretches back millennia.
And untangling those threads, understanding their significance, that's what we're here to do. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and look at one very specific example of this impact.
You're talking about the Rosetta Stone.
Bingo. I mean, talk about a tangible example of how knowledge, quite literally, can be taken away.
Right. I mean, it's not just a random rock. The Rosetta Stone was instrumental in deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. This one artifact held the key to understanding a whole civilization's written language.
And where is it now?
Sitting in the British Museum. Think about that. Imagine the knowledge lost, the stories untold, just because that link was broken.
It really highlights the tangible consequences of this historical dispossession, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. And it speaks to a larger issue, one that goes beyond just physical objects. It's about the disruption of understanding, of a people's connection to their own past.
And to make matters even more complicated, we have to navigate around this whole out-of-Africa theory, which, while scientifically sound...
Right, it's often used to reinforce this narrative that minimizes Africa's continuous development, as if to say, sure, humans originated in Africa, but anything remotely advanced must come from elsewhere.
It feeds into those harmful savage versus civilized tropes.
Exactly, completely obscuring the truth.
So we have this situation where key elements of history are missing, and even the way we talk about human origins is often skewed.
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle when someone keeps handing you pieces from a completely different box.
Yeah.
You know something's not adding up, but it's hard to see the full picture. And that's why it's no wonder so many African Americans feel this deep desire to reclaim their heritage, to rewrite the narrative.
To reclaim agency, to tell their own story.
Exactly. And what we're seeing now is a resurgence of interest in exploring those connections, studying African history on its own terms, embracing cultural and spiritual traditions, and, most importantly, questioning the narratives that have been presented for so long.
It's about time, right? But how do you even begin to do that when so much has been taken? Where do you look for answers?
You start with the sources available, critically examining them, searching for those missing pieces. You study ancient African civilizations on their own terms, not through the lens of others.
You mentioned looking at sources critically. Are there any common misconceptions or even outright myths that tend to pop up in discussions about ancient Egypt that we should be wary of?
Oh, there are plenty, but we'll dive into those after a quick break. Stay with us.
And we're back. Picking up on this idea of misconceptions surrounding ancient Egypt, I'm sure our listeners can already guess a few. Where do we even start?
Well, we could spend hours just listing them off, but one that always seems to pop up is this idea of ancient Egyptians, or at least the pharaohs, being white.
Yeah, I've seen that one floating around, usually accompanied by some very questionable interpretations of ancient artwork.
Right. It's like they see a painting with a slightly lighter skin tone, and suddenly the entire history of a continent gets rewritten.
Talk about selective vision. But seriously, how do we combat these kinds of distortions? Is it just about pointing out the absurdity of it all?
I wish it were that simple. You see, these misconceptions, they don't exist in a vacuum. They're often rooted in deeper biases, in this need to maintain a certain narrative, a narrative that places European civilization at the pinnacle of human achievement.
And relegates everyone else to the sidelines. But we know better, don't we? I mean, that's the whole point of this deep dive. To uncover the truth, to celebrate the brilliance that's been overlooked, suppressed, even outright stolen.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of reclaiming history. Because it's not just about correcting the record, it's about reclaiming a sense of ownership, of pride.
Absolutely. It's about looking at the accomplishments of Kemet and saying, Yes, this is part of my heritage too. This is part of what it means to be human.
And that sense of connection, that pride, it can be incredibly empowering. It can fuel a whole new generation to question, to explore, to create.
It's like that saying, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. Except in this case, we're talking about reclaiming a past that was deliberately hidden, obscured, and that makes the journey even more important.
Because it's in that reclaiming that we discover new truths, new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world.
And that's what we're all about here, right? Expanding our understanding, pushing beyond the limitations of a single narrative.
It's about embracing the richness, the complexity of history.
And speaking of richness and complexity, I can't help but wonder if we could somehow reclaim just one piece of Kemet's legacy, one artifact, one piece of knowledge. What would it be, and what impact might it have on our understanding today?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's like choosing a favorite star from a sky full of them. But since you posed the question, I'd have to say something that illuminates their system of education.
Oh, interesting. So not just a physical object, but knowledge itself. Why is that?
Think about it. To uncover the scrolls, the libraries, the very methods they use to pass knowledge down through generations, that would be incredible. We're talking about a society that valued education and scholarship, and their insights could be invaluable to us today.
It'd be like getting a glimpse into the minds of those ancient scholars and astronomers. I can only imagine what we could learn from their approach to critical thinking or problem solving. Maybe they even cracked the code on something we're still wrestling with today.
Imagine the possibilities. But while we're on this quest to unearth the past, it's important to remember that reclaiming history isn't just about searching for lost artifacts or knowledge. It's also about recognizing the ways in which people are actively reconnecting with their African heritage right now.
That's a great point. It's about the living history being created as people explore and embrace their roots. What are some of the ways you're seeing this happen?
Well, for one, we're witnessing a resurgence of interest in traditional African art forms, sculpting, weaving, storytelling practices that are being revitalized and reinterpreted for a modern audience. And it's not just about recreating the past, it's about carrying those traditions forward and making them relevant to the present.
I love that. There's a beautiful continuity there.
Absolutely. And it's not just through art and expression. People are delving into their genealogy, using DNA testing to trace their ancestry back to specific regions or ethnic groups within Africa.
It's like holding a mirror up to yourself, but instead of just seeing your reflection, you see generations reflected back at you.
And that can be incredibly empowering. It allows individuals to connect with a global community of people who share similar roots, to embrace their heritage with pride. And for many, this journey of reclaiming their history is about challenging the dominant narrative, correcting historical inaccuracies, and ensuring that the contributions of African civilizations are recognized and celebrated.
It's about setting the record straight, about reclaiming your place in the story. But I have to wonder, with all the complexities and layers we've uncovered, how can we ensure that this understanding of Kemet and its connection to African heritage reaches a wider audience?
That's where our collective responsibility comes in. And it begins with education, representation, and a commitment to truth.
So we're back. And after that deep dive, I think we all need a moment to process, right?
It's a lot to unpack. But that's the thing about history, isn't it? It's not just dates and names in a textbook. It's alive. It's complex, and it shapes who we are today.
And for far too long, the history, the narrative, especially surrounding Africa, it's been one-sided, incomplete, defined more by what's been taken than by what's been achieved.
It's the same old story, isn't it? Those in power get to write the history books. But when we shine a light on civilizations like Kemet, it challenges that whole narrative. Suddenly, we're not talking about a continent devoid of history or progress, but a place bursting with innovation, resilience, intellectual richness. I mean, come on, the evidence is right there.
And it's not just about righting the wrongs of the past, though that's obviously crucial. It's about recognizing that the contributions of African civilizations, they belong to all of us.
Exactly. This isn't just about Africa, it's about humanity.
Yeah.
We're all part of this grand, interconnected story. And understanding Kemet's place in that story, it helps us understand ourselves better.
It's like adding a whole new dimension to the human experience. But how do we go beyond just acknowledging these truths? How do we make sure this understanding of Kemet and its connection to African heritage actually reaches a wider audience? I mean, how do we break free from these old, tired narratives?
Well, for starters, we need to be having these conversations, not just in academic circles, but everywhere.
Hmm?
In homes, in classrooms, online.
Get those dialogues going. I love that. Make it a part of the everyday conversation.
Exactly. And that means pushing for change in our education systems. We need accurate and inclusive accounts of African history integrated into school curricula from a young age.
It's about time those textbooks caught up with the truth. And
Yeah.
it's not just about adding a chapter here or there. It's about rethinking the whole framework.
Exactly. Because history isn't linear, it's interconnected. Just like those threads we were talking about earlier, we need to be weaving a tapestry that reflects that complexity, that richness.
So education is key, absolutely. What else? What other tools do we have at our disposal?
Representation. We need museums to step up, return stolen artifacts, showcase these civilizations in their full glory.
Absolutely. No more relegating African art and artifacts to some dusty corner. Give them the space, the respect they deserve.
And it's not just about institutions. We need more scholars, writers, artists, filmmakers from all backgrounds to share their perspectives, to create works that celebrate the diversity of the human story.
Yes. More voices, more perspectives. That's how we break free from the echo chamber. And that's on all of us, right? To seek out those voices, to amplify them. It's about being curious, questioning assumptions, embracing the fact that history is rarely simple, but always fascinating.
And at the end of the day, that's what we're left with, isn't it? That sense of wonder, that desire to learn, to grow, to connect. And what better way to do that than by exploring the incredible legacy of Kemet and its enduring impact on the world?
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What will you discover on your journey into the past? Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep exploring.